or Nicholas?
Doesn't matter.
Hi, welcome to Indie Spotlight. I'm your host, Zamot, also known as Trevor, on social media. You can find links to all of my content in the video description below, but more importantly, after this interview, you're going to find the links to Nicholas's content as well. You can find ways to keep this channel ad-free, including our Subscribe Star page, the merch store where you can get your very own Frags of Beer merch, thebeardstruggle.com, where you can get the same beard products that I use, saving 15% using my code BeardWizard99. And finally, my books over at my website. Today I'm talking to Nicholas Mueller, who is a comic book creator, writer, and artist. Indie, obviously. That's why he's on Indie Spotlight, and currently has a project available on Indiegogo. So we're going to talk about all that together. So, Nicholas, why don't you give us a little bit of... Give us a background first, like what your... what got you started into comics? Where did you get, like, did you go to school for it? All that. Kind of give us a little background on yourself.
Sure. Well, those that don't know me, my name is Nicholas Mueller, and I'm the creator of Demon Hunter Raven of BMR Comics. It's a supernatural action thriller, sort of steeped within the influence of shonen, sort of like mangas. Okay. If you're into like Bleach, Naruto, Dragon Ball, but with the many aesthetics of Western sort of sensibilities, without hours of people screaming at each other, going ah, and power up levels. But it's also very heavily influenced by stuff like The Crow by James O'Barr. There's a lot of tragedy built within the series. But the story follows a young protagonist who can see demons, supernatural things at a very young age. And he becomes embedded within these secret societies. And he becomes fused with this thing called the Lightstone, a relic that fuses with him and creates a suit of armor around him. So he becomes like this very dangerous weapon in this battle against demons and other entities. So he's within all of these establishments trying to help out a place called the Twin Cities of Minnesota, which becomes this huge area for supernatural events. When I was first writing this story, many of the current world events had not quite occurred yet. So I didn't know Minneapolis would become a hotbed of such many topical discussions.
Yeah.
Because one of the main things I was dabbling with was like, well, who cares about Minneapolis? I mean, that's where I grew up.
Right.
So I just wanted to base it within a realistic area and play with a lot of locations. I mean, that's kind of, I think, why a lot of people enjoy the Marvel universe so much, is because they can point at like, oh, Spider-Man, Queens in that area.
That's what got me, yeah.
Right. Gotham, it's more of a fantasy setting. As much as it is realistic in its nature, Gotham can only be portrayed in so many different ways. Demon Hunter Raven takes place in Minneapolis. It's got a lot of supernatural things, but I wanted to keep it grounded. I didn't want it to seem so beyond the point that you couldn't relate to the characters. So the story is always related around problems, issues, and the effects of what supernatural would be. So the current Kickstarter already ended. We're on Indiegogo, and we're following into Chapter 3.
Okay.
And it's doing a lot of like, what would happen if the supernatural was on a grounded level? Like, how would modern day society deal with it? Okay. So like one of the new characters I'm introducing is Detective Vale. And as they're going in and investigating these really weird murders, events where they're just popping up across the city, and they're trying to connect these dots. Like, is this a serial killer? Okay. So it's many of the little things that we're dabbling into that are going to have effects later on. Okay. So it's also going to be expanding. Once Chapter 3 is done, we're going to be exploring other avenues of these universes and bringing in new characters that will have, I know, some stories jump off at that point. So if you're new to this is a great new jumping on point, because after that, we're going full throttle, pedal off the brakes. We're going to be going into some really cool new areas.
Very cool. You touched on something that actually, because my first novel was dystopian, and I wanted, like you said, I wanted it to be very grounded. A lot of dystopian is either so far out there that it's hard to relate to the characters sometimes it's hard to relate to the world because it's so bizarre, it's so unusual, and
Right.
like you can't even imagine a place that's like Pan Am, for example, out of the I just lost the name of the Mockingjay. What the hell is that series
Oh,
called? But you know what I mean? Like, it's so hard to imagine a world like this. So when I wrote my first dystopia, I thought I wanted to keep it close enough to reality that people could, relate, but then far enough
right.
away because it's dystopia. I didn't want people to be completely bummed out about it. So I wanted it like as far fetched as I could. That's such a weird balance. Do you find it difficult to balance like not getting too wild with the supernatural, not going too far out there and kind of keeping it in that tipping point?
Yeah. So yes and no, because I think it's fun. So my style is to go kind of somewhat absurd, anyways.
Okay.
I'm a big fan of Hideo Kojima and his
Okay.
series Metal Gear Solid and Death Stranding, and I
All
like
right.
to. I love how he dabbles within the. He has supernatural in his series, even though
Mm-hmm.
it's very realistic in its tone and nature. And I
Sure.
like how he puts these things in there that maybe shouldn't be in there, but yet he makes it work. So that's kind of where I try to find that balance of like, this is absurd enough. How do I make it work? Um,
Okay.
so if I can keep it based in reality and put something really crazy and absurd in there, and
Right.
I find that to be a really cool creative challenge.
Sure. Yeah, for sure. I have you found yourself like when something happens in, say, well, like you said, some of the current events in Minneapolis, have
Mm,
you had to rewrite anything because it was either too close or too topical and you wanted to avoid being, I guess, dating yourself? I find
yeah.
one of my big beefs right now with comics, especially the big two, is they tend to. I'm just showing some examples here too. Um, they tend to date themselves by being too topical. Like
Yep.
back in the day when the X-Men needed a bad politician, they had Senator Kelly. They
Right.
never portrayed a real politician as the bad guy in the comics because obviously then 20 years from now people are going to be like, who is that guy? Why
Yeah.
do we
Yeah.
care about this guy? Like, have you found yourself having to rewrite things because they got a little too close to reality?
I've been fortunate that I try to stay away from that whole entire part where
Okay.
I irrelevantly do not date or time the exact time that this is taking place.
Okay.
I have somewhat of an idea in my head, but I try to keep it somewhat without any sort of cohesion as to when it's going. But I'm obviously technology is going to date it, so people
Right.
will be like,
Yeah.
it's within this 5 or 10 year span.
Sure.
Um, and then historically, like I have the Crusades and historical reference like King Henry occurring in it. So
Yeah.
there's going to be date stamps, but the current modern day stuff is like a roughly 2010 to 2020 sort
Okay.
of range. So um, I don't have to worry too much about appropriating certain dates or times. Um, I can kind of allude to them, but since it's not directly influenced by modern day things, or even like when the I-35 bridge crashed in Minneapolis
Mm-hmm.
some 12 years ago. It's not particularly playing into the story, but there might be nuances
Okay.
in parts, but
Sure.
totally disevolved from the modern day.
Yeah. I noticed that there's definitely some religious elements,
Mhm.
and you talk about the Crusades and King Henry and stuff showing up in part of the story, the background. Um, is it religious inspired, similar to like the Magdalena comic, or is it
Mm.
more you more just took those elements because it's a demon hunter, so obviously it
Right.
ties in there? I mean, is it part of your background, a religious influence on this?
Well, yeah, I'm a person of faith, and
Okay,
you don't have to be of faith or any sort of
sure.
ideology to read this story. It's one of the things that's always bothered me is when Christians write comics or write any sort of entertainment, it ends up being really cheesy
Yeah,
or it's cringeworthy.
it can be.
And
Yep.
yeah, so I didn't want to fall into that thing where I'm a person of faith, but I don't want to write a book or fall into those traps. So it's just a book. It has things that are influenced by it. But
Yeah.
being also within the terminology of demon hunting, I wanted to play with a lot of those elements. And you brought up the Magdalena, and that's actually one of the books that I used as an influence.
I
The
wondered.
Order.
Yeah.
Yep,
Yeah.
yep. Big fan of the Top Cow universe, Witchblade,
Yes.
Magdalena, especially when Laura Croft was in that early beginning stage when they were all teaming up and stuff.
Yes.
Michael Turner was a huge influence on my art early in the day. So
Awesome. Awesome. Very
um,
cool. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's actually years and years ago. I collected in the early to mid
Mm.
90s, and then I stopped. X-Men, actually Marvel, as much as I loved Marvel, they killed it for me when they were doing so many crossovers. You had to
Yeah.
buy like 12 books a month just to keep up with the story, and it just I was
Well,
in
I
high
hate that.
school. Yeah, I had no money. I was in high school. I couldn't afford that.
Right.
So I
Right.
jumped off, and actually Lady Pendragon and then Magdalena is
Mm.
what got me back into comics when I was
Yeah.
older. And yeah, Magdalena is by far one of my favorites. I love and I grew up Catholic, and I'm not Christian anymore. But
Mm.
I am a person of faith. I believe there's something out there more powerful than us, obviously.
Mm.
But there's still that draw, that religious imagery, and I noticed a lot of that looking through the examples of the first book, especially the guy, and I forget his name because I have a horrible memory, but the guy in the cloak. I mean, he almost looks like a Templar, like a modern day Templar
Yeah.
agent, with the
Yep.
chainmail.
The Crusader. Yeah, and
Yeah,
that's meant to almost, I don't want to say mock, but it's definitely used to draw some sort of emotions out of certain people. So I still go to church. I'm a full-fledged believer, but that doesn't mean that I want to stand around and point my finger and go and preach to people or shove it down people's throats.
sure, yeah,
Um, but one of the things also too is I found a lot of people talk about representation, and for me as a person of faith, I find that my faith is not always represented in the way that I would find it
yeah,
applicable or even satisfying. So I wanted to also make a book that uses all these various different faith groups. And what
hmm,
if, let's tell the actual story of the religious backgrounds of, like, why
sure,
did this guy split off from this group? Why is this person this way? So
yeah,
part of the secret society also deals with that very sort of affliction. And I'm a huge fan of Assassin's Creed, and I
okay, yeah,
wanted to sort of go into in depth into the idea of these historical archetypes playing into that and how do they affect modern day civilization,
yeah,
without also pointing a finger of, like, you can't believe this or you can't have that. And again, it's just a fun book. If I can't entertain you, I haven't done my job at the end of the day.
yeah,
Um, so first and foremost, I want to also make sure that people understand that there's elements of that in this book, but in no way, shape, or form am I trying to shove anything down your throat, because I
yeah.
I want to entertain, and by the end of the day, I get bored too. If I'm not entertained by what's going on, then I don't
Right.
want to do the book anymore. So
Right. And I didn't, yeah, I didn't see any indication. It doesn't,
cool.
and that's, I like that because there's a lot of people that do, like you said, they either don't represent a certain group or a certain
Mhm.
faith, well, or the way they do represent it is sometimes in a mocking manner.
Yeah,
But then a lot of people do tend to get preachy, whether it be
yeah,
politics or religion, and it does seem like every panel is trying to convince you of something. It's like, you tell me a story, don't try to convince me to believe what
right.
you believe, and that is tough, especially when
Very
you're
tough.
dealing with modern comics. You run into that a lot. So we talked about Magdalena and all that. What is going way back, thinking back, and I don't know how old you are. I'm an older dude myself. What is the first comic you fell in love with that you remember falling in love with?
Well, so I'm in my 30s,
Okay.
and so I grew up around when the Ninja Turtles first came up as, like, the Fred Wolf
Oh
version.
yeah, yeah.
So I was absolutely just dumbfounded when I found out there's a black and white version, and it
Oh
was
yeah.
nothing like the cartoons. And it was bloody and gory. So I
Yes.
just got heavily into the Eastman and Laird's versions,
Very cool.
and that just changed my whole entire perception of what you could do. And these black and white things just blew my mind. And so I just kind of started searching around. I got into Archie, I got into DC, got into Marvel.
Cool.
And then I think I've just had moments where I've just kind of left and came back. Like, Top Cow got me back in with, Witchblade, Magdalena. Uh,
Yeah.
the New 52 kind of had my interest. So I was just kind of like, oh, wow, this is interesting. I can't believe they just did this. And I checked
Yeah.
that out for a while. But I would say I'm probably more into manga at the moment just because of the current atmosphere.
Yeah.
Um, I just want stories. I don't want to be have a finger pointed at me. I don't care whichever side anyone's on. I just want to be entertained.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, I'm with you. I jumped off of Marvel after the last, this, what was it, 2012 Secret Wars run. It was right before, they turned Cap to Hydra, and
oh yeah.
I was tired, like you said. I was tired of
Hmm.
being preached to.
Yep.
And I went to a lot of indie stuff. I didn't give up comics completely, but I've been a Marvel fan
Hmm.
for 30 plus years, and that was a hard break. Um,
Yeah, because they just full stop, like they just pulled the brakes on that train and they just said, "All right, everyone off.
yeah, and
We're
I
going this
that was
direction now."
yep, and that was hard for me to give up. Um, so so out of all those, what would you say? Besides your favorite book, what about your favorite character all time? If you had to work on, let's say if you had to work on a big character that everybody knows, what who would you
Yeah,
pick?
that's hard because talking about today's stuff, it's like a lot of these characters have changed and they're no longer
Mm-hmm.
who they were back like in the '60s or the '90s or the
Yeah,
'80s. I've always been a big fan of the Ninja Turtles, like I just stated a little bit ago.
yeah,
But my problem is always I don't think I could do justice to these characters. I'm too much of a fan that
yeah.
at the end of the day I think I would screw them up so bad. So
That'd be
I'm
tough.
yeah, I'm more of the mindset that I would rather just do my own thing.
Yeah,
Um, because I've always wanted to see a much more darker tone to the Powerpuff Girls. I always thought that that show had such a lot of potential, and seeing the CW kind of put out their
yeah,
really weird version is kind of depressing. It's like, oh, if you're not going to do it right, don't do it at all, please.
yeah,
Um,
yeah. I agree. That does look. It looks kind of weird. I don't.
it's just,
I never was a fan. I'd seen it because it was about the time my kid was coming up.
mm,
It wasn't anything I ever watched, but I did see it.
right.
It was a weird show, and
It's very weird.
I could appreciate the what they were trying to do, but it just never
Yeah,
hooked me. But then looking at what they're doing with the live action, I'm like, well, how is anybody? Yeah, I don't know. It just I don't know. Maybe
yeah.
it'll
It's
come out in post production, but it doesn't look good.
yeah. My hopes aren't very high, and
Yeah,
I don't know.
no.
They don't have
Uh,
a very good high track record.
no, they don't. Not with live action stuff so far.
Right.
So I noticed you're writing and illustrating. Are you also doing? I like. Are you doing all the heavy lifting, color editing, all of it? You're doing the whole
Yes.
book
Yes.
yourself.
Um,
Uh,
chapter 3, though, I have hired on some extra eyes and editors and
okay.
co-writers to kind of, because some of the feedback I got really great for chapters 1 and 2 was just that like, so I'm an artist first and foremost. I was training up and trying to get a career in comics, and needless to say, that just ended up not going that way.
Right.
Um, so that my visuals are kind of my expertise. So when it came to
Mm-hmm.
story, I'm not as well equipped in that area.
Right.
I could tell a story, but I couldn't tell it as the feedback I got was that the elements were there, they weren't connecting well, or there'd be
Right.
certain jumps in plot that I'd be like, why did that happen? I'd be like, well, I guess I didn't convey that as well. So I've had some extra eyes come on for this one to help me
Right.
navigate that water better.
Okay.
Um, so guys like Paul Tucker, Brannon, and
Ah.
Matthew
Okay.
Reese have been some of the huge components to making sure that this isn't just a independent book, that it's got quality behind its name, and that when you
Right.
pick it up, you don't want to just be like, yeah, okay, this is obviously indie.
Yeah.
Um, I want to step up my game into a higher quality water level.
Very cool. Yeah. Paul's actually in the live stream. He stopped
Yeah.
in to say hi. No, that's cool because I was curious that because I being an indie author myself and
Hmm.
I self-publish. I like everything, so editing covers all of it. And
Yeah.
it's tough to find time to balance because you know I want to do all my time writing, but obviously you got to
Yeah.
market, you got to do all the other stuff that comes with it that normally a publisher
Absolutely.
would do for you. Um, do you find? Well, I guess that you answered my question. Bringing on more people is going to give you more time to focus on the core of the book, but also get some help making sure it's polished and help you with that.
Well,
Uh,
that can also bring in some new issues too, because then you have to have people that are like-minded like you. Like
yeah,
you can't just hire anybody off the street. And I vetted a lot of the guys before they came in. Like I thought real hard before I even approached them about stuff.
yeah,
So you gotta have to know within your networking group who is a valuable asset, and if they're able to handle that job.
true.
Um, so it's not everyone's going to come up and do as good of a job as you think they will. And
Right,
so far, the guys that I have working with me are they're grade A standard,
awesome.
and I'm just really pleased with how they have been helping me, how they've turned things around.
Good.
So we've seen a lot of growth this last 2 years, or I'm sorry, just this last year,
Yeah,
from when I released the first Kickstarter last year, back in March when COVID first hit. That was truly a challenging uh, experiment, not having any sort of notoriety or any reputation, and just putting a book out there, and then everything hits, and
yeah,
you're just trying to get just get funded.
yeah.
Um,
It's tough.
yeah,
That was a tough time.
Hmm.
In And you're right, you can't, like, so many people want to do this, so many people want to write, or they want to make comic books, they want to write books or make music,
Yep.
and you just don't know, if they're going to be the kind of person that's going to follow through.
Yeah.
A lot of people spend a lot of time talking about what they're going to do, but you
Yeah.
obviously, you can't hitch your wagon to somebody that can't produce, so you're totally right.
Right.
um when it comes to, so COVID's, not completely wrapped up, but they're, at least in my area, we're starting to see shows. I've actually got a show this Saturday.
Oh, cool.
Um, are you going to be looking at conventions near you, little stuff, big stuff? What's the plan going forward? Is it going to be a
I
totally online thing, or?
Yeah, for right now, I'm just online. I don't really see a demand for me to be going in person, and I could care less either way.
Yeah,
But I have 5 kids, and me and my wife are pretty busy as it is. So,
yeah, for
um,
sure.
for me to just up and leave means that she's kind of lone gunning it for the weekend or whatever. So,
Right.
it's just not a an option for me at the moment. So,
Yeah.
doing stuff like this online, interviews and just talking to people one on one is something that I can actually do. But maybe in the future, I would love to
Yeah.
get back into that. But right now, my goal is to just keep creating content, putting more products out. We've got another thing I'm going to be doing in the end of summer,
Okay.
and then something in the fall. So right now, we're just trying to kind of build up our catalog, build up the publishing route, and just network
Yeah.
with a lot more people.
Good. 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 Sounds good. Uh, do, 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 do. So are your books? So you've got the Indiegogo coming up. Are people able to buy the issues, back issues? Are they available on any of the online outlets for people to get them?
So that's actually where things kind of funnily happened. Is so back in October, my last Kickstarter ended, or the Chapter 2 Kickstarter ended,
Okay.
and I was kind of I saw some really good growth in that. I got a lot of people that I had never, that big names that kind of came to me and were like, wow, they wanted to do something with me.
Oh, cool.
There's more stories behind that, but within that meantime, which I just released this information last week, so I can actually finally talk about it, is I had a book publisher come up and ask, like, we're putting together a new distribution deal, and we would like you to be part of that round.
Cool.
So I was already in the middle of Chapter 3, and the way that I was working is that they were these big, huge chapters, and I was just releasing them as is. But when they came to me with this idea of producing something within stores, I was like, wow, I've got enough content, but I'm not situated for single issues,
Yeah.
because the graphic novels is what they end up being, or like
Sure.
really thick books. So I had to go back and do new covers, and the first chapter, which was only 48 pages at that time, was all in black and white.
Okay.
So I went back and remastered all of those to have color and fix spelling mistakes and stuff like that.
Sure. Yeah.
So as of this moment, the back issues aren't the everything's going to be coming out like brand new. So
Oh, cool.
there's nothing at the moment, and we're going through a whole entire, like, I wouldn't say rebranding process, but we're kind of just getting set up so that when things hit at the end of summer, when
Mm-hmm.
comic shops will have something. Um,
Nice.
yeah. So, but right now, the only way to do that is through Patreon. Well,
Mm-hmm.
um, I'll be if you don't have, so like me, I don't have a comic shop near me,
Right.
and so one of the deals will be is that through Patreon is if you're part of a certain membership tier, you'll get those books irregardless because you've basically paid for that amount
Oh,
on
cool.
select participation months.
Okay.
So I'll
Sounds good.
actually be releasing a tentative schedule as to when people can expect those.
Awesome. All right, good. Yeah, hopefully people watch for that. That's cool. Like, getting into shops, it's such a big, like, my comic book shop is, one guy works out of his apartment now.
Mm.
He can't afford to keep a shop. He
Oh, it's so
basically
hard.
Oh, I know. He basically
Yep.
orders what we want. We just go pick it up. He doesn't even carry back issues or anything.
Yeah.
And with what DC did, he can't do DC anymore. He can't afford it.
Oh
And
yeah, that's
he's
ridiculous.
Yeah, and he's afraid Marvel's going to be the same way because, um, while it's not quite the same setup as DC, he's basically going to have to pay extra for the shipping, and he's pretty sure he's going to lose the discount he gets from Diamond, which allows him to basically make enough money to do what he does.
Right.
So yeah, stores, getting into stores is huge, but I'm so worried about stores, in the near future.
Yeah.
And you, like you said, there's not one near you. The closest one to me is about 30 minutes away. Um,
Mm.
and more are closing every day. It's really,
Right. And I think that's
horrible.
as now as creators, we have to also be a little business savvy, and we have to figure out how do our customers want to buy our products.
Yeah.
And that can be kind of a hassle because then you can also set up. You have to be kind of open to every platform, like whether it's Kickstarter or Indiegogo. Because I had people that said, "Oh, I would support you on Kickstarter, but I'm just totally against it." And then if you
Right.
go to Indiegogo, so it's like, okay, well, I'll make a route there for you. So you guys got to be willing and open to listen to your customers, and because
Right.
then you're just leaving money on the table, and you don't want to
Yeah.
leave someone hanging. I mean,
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Yeah, I run into the same thing. I have people that won't buy from me because right now my book's only available on Amazon, and they don't
mm,
want to support Amazon. It's like, but yeah, you could buy it directly from me, but you
exactly.
gotta come to a show, or you gotta go to eBay. Well, then you have people that don't like eBay. It's such a struggle to find
Yeah.
out, because the outlets for us to sell are these major online places that make it convenient for us to do it, and then you have people
Yes.
that don't want to support them, and it's like, well, shoot, like, I don't know what else to tell you, but I got to get it out there somehow. So
Exactly. Exactly.
um if you were, so you talked about talking with other creators and other people, and big things coming your way, what would be, so of all the indie creators and comic people that you've run into recently or so far, if you had to work on it, like say your indie dream team, who would you work with, um, in a collab kind of environment, if
Mm.
somebody were to throw together a big collaborative book of a bunch of characters?
I think, I've actually been fortunate enough this last year because of the expansion and growth that wasn't something that I foresaw. I actually kind of hit some of those home runs already, whether it was
Nice.
through a game, traction with a pinup, um, just talking to someone, or working at like during the summer, I did a one shot with Robert and his character Clayman,
Okay.
who and then I've had a chance to talk to the Common America crew, and they're awesome. And then
Nice.
like Tyler from Draw and Talk, we've gotten to dabble and talk about business inquiry stuff. And then
Cool.
the one that really was really fun though was when I hit it up with Brian Ball and his character Sailor
Yeah.
Regs Regina,
Yep.
and he hit it off where we got to do this pinup where Raven is fighting with Regina, the Sailor Rogowski
Oh,
version.
cool.
And so anyone that backed the Kickstarter gets that as a pinup because we hit the a certain marking at the 7K mark.
Nice.
So that was a pinup. Everyone gets that across the board. Um,
Very
so
nice.
and then like Cody Fernandez of Jack Irons, I've gotten to do some cool stuff with him. And
Very cool.
um,
Yeah, I like the looks of that book too. Yeah, there's a few of those out there that I'm looking forward to getting into more indie stuff.
yeah,
Um, Getting it is the trouble, but yeah, once I can get my
yeah,
hands on it, yeah, Rags was one of the first indie books that I got that didn't even look like an indie book. I was
oh
really blown
yeah,
away by their work.
yeah,
Such good way, and I love that. I'm with you with the black and white. I don't think it works on every comic. Like, I want my
hmm,
superheroes to be bright and shiny and colorful, but like some of that stuff, like the Ninja Turtles, were so good in black and white.
yeah,
There's a series that was put out by, I think it's called Fubar, that was put
mm,
out by the guys around Alternate Comics, and it was all zombie stories, and they were all black and white, and they worked really well black and white.
yeah.
And then yeah, Rags. I loved his minimal use of color, was awesome. The way they did that
Right. And
stuff.
then the way that he would highlight certain things with a color, it was really
Mm-hmm.
important. And you
Yeah.
started realizing that it was really, really intentional on a lot of the stuff he was doing. It wasn't just kind of a funny slapstick book, like it was heavily intentional. And
Yeah.
just knowing stuff that's going on with Sailor Rogowski, I'm more excited. And people shouldn't jump ship, is what I should say. They need to stay
Yeah.
course because there's some important things coming up in there too.
Yeah. I'm looking forward to what those guys are doing. So hopefully I'll
Mhm.
have them on the show at some point. Um, so what? So we'll wrap it up with advice for anybody who wants to do this, or wants, they think they want to be an indie comic creator, an indie
Mm.
writer. What would you say is the best and the worst part about, um, what would you tell somebody that would ask you, hey, I want to do this for the rest of my life? What would be the best and the worst part of doing what we do as indies?
Yeah. So the real catch of it all is you got to view this as a business, and comics don't make a lot of money, period. We're not in that high
Right.
percentage. We're not Brian Polito. We're not,
Right.
these big name guys like Jake Parker and all those guys that are making hundreds of thousands per a Kickstarter.
Yeah.
We're low tier. A lot of those guys have name reputations. They've built themselves up. They've become no they've gotten notoriety. They've gotten reputations.
Yeah.
um, So you have to think of this as a long game. If you're going into this thinking you're getting some short-term money, you're not playing the business right.
Yeah.
Consistency is going to be key. If you have successfully funded Indiegogo, Kickstarter, whatever,
Mm-hmm.
um, deliver it, put it out there, and
Yeah.
then when that's done, do another one. When that's done, do another one. People will start following because you're putting out consistent product after product after product. Now, the thing that can bite you in the butt is just because you're being consistent and you're putting out a bad product, that can be just as bad. If you're putting out something that's bad and it's turning away more people, that's where you kind of have to kind of look at your overall process.
Yeah.
And the feedback's just going to be as important. Like I remember talking to one guy, he had a successful crowdfunder, put it out there. The feedback he got was it was bad. Like the
Yeah.
book did not hit on any level. And he was just like, but I'm just going to keep plowing ahead. I was like, no, don't do that.
Yeah.
Re-strategize because now you're going to be less. And it showed because then everything came back and bit him in the butt.
Yeah.
Um, and that's because at the end of the day, this money isn't yours. No one's owed you that dollar.
Right.
We're providing entertainment.
Mm-hmm.
And so you have to bring value to the table. And unfortunately, because of crowdfunding, and this is how independent comics seems to be going right now, is
Right.
that people want to not just support the book, they want to support you, the
Mm-hmm.
creator. It's tandem now. Unfortunately, people aren't able to separate the creator from the art. It's just,
Right.
we're having such a struggle with just not doing that. So you have to portray yourself in a professional manner that if you're on the
Mm-hmm.
internet and you're creating drama, you're creating fights, you might be gaining some potential customers, but you also might be losing a lot of potential customers.
Right.
So
For sure.
understand that the demographic you're marketing to.
Yeah.
Because there is such thing as outrage dollars, but there's also such thing as just good business practices. So
Right.
don't think of it as like, what your month to month is. Think of the long term. Like where do you see yourself 5 years from now? And for those that are trying and that aren't seeing a lot of uptick, I'm having success this year. You guys didn't see me the last 5 years where I was just struggling, and it's
Right.
I put my boat in the water and I didn't go anywhere. The no
Yeah.
traction, the motor was burnt out, or the paddles were broken or something.
Right.
So um, you keep going until you find that one thing that just hits it, and then you kind of just keep pushing because the minute it hits, um, you got to be ready because then it's all eyes looking at you for just a brief second.
Right.
Um, that would be say the one con is that a lot of times you have a moment where you're on the stage and you're playing for this large crowd, and then you gotta go off into the isolation again, and you're working by yourself,
Mm-hmm.
and you're creating something that you have to anticipate how people are going to react to it, but there's no one in the room there with you to dabble or dialogue off with.
Right, exactly. Yeah, you just gotta hope it works when you come out the
Exactly.
other way. Yeah, and it's funny that you say that because I've not, and even recently, I've seen so many people who work for the big publishers.
Mm,
They say, well, you don't have to listen. The customer doesn't matter. What the customer says doesn't matter. Only the editor matters, or only and I'm thinking back to how it used to be.
yeah.
When Stan Lee would answer letters in the back of comics and talk to the
Yes.
fans, and now you go on social media, anything related to Marvel, and they're basically telling you to piss off. They don't want to hear it. Like, do you
Exactly.
not understand why you're losing this battle? Like,
Exactly.
people
Well,
need to hear. They need to know that their dollars are going to somebody who gives a crap.
exactly. And you brought up a good reason too. A lot of people jumped ship after Secret Wars because the titles were no longer catering to them, to that demographic.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean that they went away. They're still out there somewhere,
Yeah.
and there's an audience for that stuff. Marvel, DC, they aren't making that stuff anymore. I mean,
Right.
that train left the shop, the depot a long time ago.
Yeah.
There's still people willing to buy and look at stuff. The unfortunate downside is independent is so much more costly than,
Yeah.
although actually now we look at it, DC and Marvel are starting to hit our prices, and we're like,
Yeah.
wait, I thought we were expensive, but they're putting
Yeah.
out stuff that's within our range, and
Yeah.
sometimes now we're cheaper. So
Yeah, for sure. I
it's
mean,
crazy.
when I can go, I can buy. When Alternative started doing newsprint, and proved that not only can it sell, but it can sell cheap.
Yeah.
I think they opened up a market because it's much more. I'm much more likely to try a new book at $1 or
Right.
$2 than I am at $5. I mean, I used to buy
Exactly.
novels for $5. I'm not going to buy a comic book for $5 if I haven't
Mm,
read it before. Unless I'm really sold. Like, you really got to sell me if I'm going to spend that kind of money on a comic book.
exactly.
Uh,
And that's also a business practice a lot of people don't understand in marketing, that you're funding your idea, but at the same time you have to have a door open for people to walk in and test,
right.
window shop. Like, they have to be able to
Yep.
preview what you're putting out and get hooked, because I mean, for one, a lot of us are putting out $25 books with 48 pages in them. I mean, that's not, if the book's bad, then you kind of feel like you got your money stolen, or like, oh,
Right.
that wasn't a good a deal. So
Yeah. Yeah.
we kind of need to, yeah.
Yeah, preview issues, zero issues, like a lot of people do. Something, yeah, to get to people to just look,
Yeah.
and some people are so stingy, and there are some indie creators out there that I think are, they're a little too full of themselves, I think,
Hmm.
and they don't want to do that. They're like, well, my time is worth XYZ. Well, sure, it might be, but if it's not, if it really isn't worth that much, then
Right.
you're going to be a flash in the pan, and people aren't going to be talking about you in a couple
Exactly.
months.
And your customer base will set that price for you.
Yeah,
I mean, you can dabble in certain incremental levels, but at the end of the day, if people aren't buying at those levels, or they're not participating in your endeavor, then
yeah,
you may have set your goal too high, or you may have set yourself at a skill peak that maybe you're just not at there yet. And,
right,
and and a lot of it has to do with your name and reputation. Do you have
sure,
that footing to stand on? Do people speak of you the same way you speak of yourself? So
right,
um, we're in an industry that, even if we're independent, though, um, a lot of it has to do with perception.
yeah,
Um,
for sure,
so I
for
think it can be a
sure.
big deal.
So what's the best thing? Like, for me, being indie, the best thing is total control. Like,
Mm,
you can't stop me, because I'm the manager, I'm the brand,
right.
I'm the owner of the company. For you, what is the best thing about doing it this way, and doing it the hard way, because it is harder, you
Oh yeah,
know. So
definitely.
what makes it worth it doing it this way?
Oh, you hit it right on the nail there. It's independent. You get to work for yourself. Um, Give or take, whether people want to join you on that journey, and
Mm-hmm.
eventually, you can build up a fan base around it. It's just, how much of a niche group are you involved
Right.
in? Um, and I've worked for plenty of corporations. I've worked in marketing. I've worked in management. I've worked in several areas where, I had a lot of power. I had a lot of key positions, but at
Mm-hmm.
the end of the day, it was just like, I'm working for this guy, and
Right.
some that's gonna be satisfying to some degree. But for me, it was, at the end of the day, I just wasn't satisfied, and being able to make these stories on my own accord, my own sort of give and take, has been more rewarding and favorable.
Sure.
Um, and the fact that people enjoy it, that people are coming along and willing to spend money on something, that, because when you're, like, when we're talking earlier, when you're spending so much time isolated and you're just like, oh, I hope this
Yeah.
works, and then people are like, yeah, here's some money, I want to read that, and you're
Yeah.
like, really? Okay.
Right.
So
That is such a weird feeling, isn't it?
uh,
When you sold your first book, like, what is there hard there? I mean, you have kids, obviously there's some feelings out there that are similar, but like, when somebody hands you that first dollar bill for the thing that you produce, there's few feelings in the world that are quite
yeah,
like that. Maybe when they come back, when the same person comes back and does it again, or when they tell you how much they
yeah,
appreciated it. But yeah, that's such a, it's so bizarre, because we all deal with that am I good enough
right.
feeling, that imposter syndrome. So when we do put ourselves out there, we're like, this isn't that
Hmm.
good. We've read it a million times, we're bored by our own work, like, this isn't that good, and then you put it out there
Right.
and somebody's like, oh, I want to read this. You're like, what?
Yeah,
Why?
exactly. Why?
Yeah.
I
It's,
Repeat customers, though, is even more valuable, because
oh
then it
yeah.
means you're doing something right, and then you've
Hmm.
got something rolling. And then when you've got people saying like, "Yeah, man, you need to go buy his stuff," and you're like, "Why? Why?"
Right.
It just blows your mind. You're like,
It
I'm not going to
is.
stop you, but why?
Yeah, exactly. It is so weird, but I love it.
Oh,
It's one of those great feelings, but it's still, even today, like, I started selling books in 2018. So even
mm,
today when I sell a book, there's still that part of me that's like, it feels weird, and
yeah,
I'm signing it for them and I'm thanking them, and in my mind I'm like, I don't get it, but cool.
yeah,
I'm
yeah.
really happy, but it's really weird.
It's one of those things that you can't describe to anyone because it doesn't equate to like your first wedding day or your
Right.
first child being born. It's just like someone believes in you enough to buy your product,
Yeah.
but not only did they believe you the first time, then they're coming back another time, and you're
Yeah.
like, what's wrong with you?
Yeah. Yeah. It is such a weird feeling.
Yeah.
Um, so they could find your stuff on Indiegogo. I'm going to put a link in the video description below. You're going to be in bookstores in the fall, late summer, fall.
Yeah, quarter 3 when that sort of business happens.
Okay.
If you have a comic shop and Golden Distribution doesn't already do business with them,
Okay.
you can contact me and a few other people, and I'll get you hooked up with it. But yeah, Golden regularly used to do board game distribution, so they're
Okay.
already
Yeah.
in line with hobby shops. So
Sure.
they are now branching off into books, and I got lucky enough to be one of those creators involved with it.
Awesome.
So
That's
yeah,
cool. Yeah, good to see somebody competing with Diamond finally. That's not, one
exactly.
of the publishers themselves. Very cool. And then you've got future projects with other creators. Anything you want to plug that you can right now?
Well, actually, once next Monday on my Twitter and a few other any social site, I'll be revealing some stuff for Patreon. Patreon's the best place to keep up to date with me right now, so
Okay.
that's BMR Comics at Patreon.
I'm gonna
Um,
make some notes here so that I can remember to put that
I
in
will.
there.
I'll
Oh
actually just
yeah,
post that right into our comments right now.
yeah. Drop
Um,
that there, and I'll copy and paste it into the video description.
cool. Well, there's the private chat, but yeah, Patreon is where I try to keep the most up to date stuff.
Okay.
I do a whole entire creative process. You can see how the story's being made, and then for just $1, you can see pages before anyone else. It's
Awesome.
kind of like the Webtoons monthly page, but it's at my slow pace. So if you
Okay.
enjoy the work I do, I'm gonna give you some free stuff, and then I do video analytics. Since I've worked in marketing, um, I can kind of give some tidbits to people how to market your book. So that's kind of a video series I do on Patreon as well. That's going to be
Awesome.
getting a little bit more in depth. So um, I'm kind of heading out of the beta phase of it. I launched it in January, and we were just kind of testing out the waters to see like what was applicable and what did and didn't work. And I've gotten some really great feedback from my Patreons.
Sure.
So come May, we're going to be going into phase 1 of like, okay, operation of this is what we're going to be setting in motion for the rest of the year. And
Okay.
if people like what we're doing, we'll continue on that path.
Awesome.
But yeah, come Monday, I'm going to be releasing some new information for Patreon and how it will continue and how it will benefit people. And got some cool stuff coming.
Good deal. Good deal. All right. I'll make sure all that's linked below. So you guys, if you're watching the video, you're watching the live stream, check that after all this is wrapped up. You'll be able to find all those links and keep track of Nicholas's stuff, progress, get those books. We showed some examples. So if you're late to the stream or you're watching the recording, check out those examples. Make sure you like, comment, subscribe. Go follow Nicholas over on Twitter and check out his Patreon to keep up to date with his stuff. And check out my links to keep up to date with this. So I will see you guys again soon. Much love.